The night cracked open with the sound of boots on gravel and a single command that froze the air, sharp as a blade, slicing through rain and fear and misunderstanding. A command meant to end something fragile before it could breathe again. A command thrown at a girl whose arms were trembling not from guilt, but from a lifetime of being judged by the patches on her jacket and the road dust on her boots. A command that would change every life in that clearing, even though the man who gave it had no idea who she really was, where she came from, or what kind of fire lived quietly behind her tired eyes. Before this story carries you any further, take a second after this opening moment to do something powerful with us. Because if you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us we are more than our appearances, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope tonight, subscribe to the channel for more real, emotional stories like this, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from so we can feel how far this moment travels. Emily Carter had learned early that the world reads leather before it reads hearts, and that the rumble of a motorcycle could drown out a soft voice faster than any storm. She was standing on the edge of a state forest road, rain soaking the hem of her jacket, her hands wrapped around a small, shivering body that weighed less than regret but heavier than fear. The girl she held was not a child, not an animal, but a wounded soul in the shape of a young woman named Lily Moore. Someone Emily had found collapsed near the trail after a hit-and-run that left skid marks and silence behind. Emily had not stopped to think about laws or uniforms or assumptions. She had stopped because her father had taught her that when the road throws someone down, you lift them up, even if your hands get dirty. The ranger, Thomas Hale, arrived with authority stamped into his posture and suspicion trained by years of dealing with poachers, smugglers, and desperate people who knew how to lie with calm eyes. He saw the bike first, low and black, engine ticking as it cooled, patches stitched on the back of a jacket that told a story he thought he already understood. He saw Emily next, tall, mud on her boots, arms wrapped around another body in a way that looked dangerous if you wanted it to. He did not see the blood soaking through Lily's sleeve, or the way Emily's hands were shaking as she tried to keep pressure on a wound with a torn scarf. He did not see fear the way it really was. He saw threat, and he reacted the way he had been trained to react when the night offered no guarantees. Emily's life flashed not as scenes of rebellion, but of quiet mornings in a garage that smelled like oil and coffee. Of a father named Jack Carter who rode with a club known across 3 states not for chaos, but for charity runs and funeral escorts. A man whose arms were inked with stories, and whose voice softened when he talked about doing right by strangers. Jack had raised Emily on the road, but also on rules that mattered, rules about helping first and explaining later, about never leaving someone alone when they were hurt. Emily remembered his hands steadying hers when she learned to ride, his voice telling her that respect earned on the road lasts longer than fear demanded at gunpoint. She remembered his hospital bed 3 years ago, the machines humming like engines at idle, his final lesson being delivered without words as he squeezed her hand and trusted her to keep going. Thomas Hale had his own ghosts, though he hid them behind procedure and commands. He had lost his younger brother to a drunk driver on a back road not far from where Emily stood now. That loss had hardened something in him, had taught him to act fast and ask later, because later was where regret lived. He had spent years believing that danger wore certain uniforms, rode certain machines, spoke certain slang. He had spent years not noticing how often he was wrong, because being wrong did not always announce itself with sirens. The rain thickened, the forest breathing around them, and the moment stretched until it felt like it might snap. Emily shifted her stance, careful not to jostle Lily, whose breath came shallow and uneven. Emily's face was calm in the way only someone who had survived storms could be calm. But inside, she was screaming at the unfairness of being seen as the villain while trying to be a lifeline. She thought of the way the world had looked at her since she was 16, the way teachers had warned her, neighbors had whispered, officers had smirked. All because of a bike and a last name that belonged to a man they had never bothered to know. A second ranger arrived, younger, breathless, flashlight bouncing, and in that small shift of attention something important happened. The beam caught the blood. It caught the torn scarf knotted tight. It caught Lily's face, pale and slack, eyes fluttering, It caught Emily's jaw clenched not in defiance but in focus. The forest seemed to lean in, as if even the trees wanted the truth to land. Everything slowed the way it does when a life is balanced on a thin line. Thomas felt the weight of his assumptions press back against him, uncomfortable and heavy. He saw not a threat but a rescuer, not a biker stereotype but a woman doing the hardest thing without applause. He felt the old ache of his brother's absence twist into something else, something closer to humility. He realized how close he had come to making the night worse, to breaking the wrong thing because fear had spoken louder than observation. Help arrived in the form of paramedics, whose professionalism cut through tension like clean air. Lily was stabilized, lifted, saved in the quiet way miracles often happen when people do their jobs and someone had the courage to stop. Emily rode behind the ambulance on her bike, rain streaking her visor, heart pounding with relief and anger and a sadness she did not have time to name. Thomas followed, lights low, thoughts loud. At the hospital, fluorescent lights replaced moonlight, and truths had a way of showing themselves in paperwork and whispered explanations. Thomas learned who Emily was not from rumors, but from records of charity rides, from notes of commendation buried under years of indifference. From a nurse who recognized the Carter name, because Jack Carter's club had raised money for the pediatric wing after her niece's surgery. Thomas learned that Emily had been on her way home from a night shift at a warehouse, that she had no record, no warrants, no history of violence, only a habit of stopping when others sped past. Emily sat alone in a plastic chair, jacket heavy with rain, watching the doors that hid Lily's fate. She felt the old exhaustion settle into her bones, the weariness of always having to prove that kindness could wear leather and ride loud. She thought about leaving town, about roads that did not know her name, about starting fresh somewhere the past had not painted her with one color. But then she thought about Lily, about how close she had been to disappearing, about how one decision had changed that. She knew she would stop again, no matter the cost. Thomas stood at a distance, wrestling with a truth that stung. He saw how easily power could become cruelty when fueled by assumption. He thought about the brother he had lost and wondered what he would have wanted him to do tonight. He felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he had mistaken for strength. He walked away from his badge for a moment and toward being human. Days passed. Lily lived. She spoke of headlights vanishing, of pain and cold, of waking to hands that did not let go. She spoke of Emily with gratitude that filled the room like sunlight. News traveled the way it always does, uneven and imperfect, but it traveled. A small local paper ran a story that did not sensationalize, that did not flatten Emily into a trope. It told the truth simply, and that was enough. The forest road did not change, but something in the people did. Thomas began training sessions with a different emphasis, talking about observation, about slowing down, about seeing the person before the patch. Emily kept writing, kept working, kept stopping. She visited Lily during recovery, bringing books and quiet company, never asking for thanks. The world did not suddenly become fair, but it tilted, just a little toward understanding. As this story moves toward its end, if it has reached into you and stirred something, if it reminded you of a moment when you were judged too quickly or helped by someone unexpected, please take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs to believe again, and subscribe so these stories can keep finding their way to the right hearts. Emily visited her father's old garage one evening, dust motes floating like memories. She ran her fingers along the workbench where he had taught her patience and pride. She thought about how close the night had come to going wrong, about how easily a command could have ended in tragedy, about how mercy sometimes needs room to breathe. She understood that being a biker's daughter had given her more than a reputation. It had given her a compass that pointed toward others when the road forked. Thomas drove past the forest road on a later shift and slowed, not because he expected trouble, but because he had learned the value of looking twice. He felt lighter for it. He knew he would make mistakes again. He also knew he would own them faster. Just before we leave you with the quiet after the storm, we have a special request for you, because stories live longer when we speak back to them. So please comment one word that this story left in your heart, whether it's hope, courage, grace, or something else entirely. The night that began with a command meant to separate ended with a lesson that brought people closer. A lesson that said the truth of a person is not stitched on their back or parked beneath a streetlight, but carried in what they do when no one is watching. And sometimes the bravest thing any of us can do is to look again, choose kindness, and let a stranger surprise us with who they really are.